Okay. What is this notification? Uh, I got a notification from my Streamlabs. It's like, don't forget to unmute your mic. You're streaming. Like, yes, but I know I'm not technically live yet. So, hi, welcome to the live stream. I have classwork to do. I'm gonna start with my modern United States history, and then I'm gonna go over to my English. Hold up, though, before we start. Oh, hello, hi, Super Senior Ghetto, hello. Before we start, though, I'm gonna show you all this shit, because I was digging around in the classes before I actually, like, started. So we're supposed to watch the film Pride and Prejudice. We can either watch the free miniseries that's on, Tubi, or I can actually, like, rent and watch the 2005 Pride and Prejudice movie. But, okay, so there's modules that go with it. There's one here, which I'll open that up so you guys can see. And it's this. It's a like a 12-minute video lecture. Chill, cool, whatever, right? But there's another one. There's this one right here, the PowerPoint. I was like, oh, I'm supposed to follow along with the PowerPoint. What is this? What? Man, I love going to community college. It's definitely not broken. It's perfect. Community college does everything perfectly every single time. What is this? What is this? I can't follow along with the PowerPoint. I'm just gonna have to pray that the lecture is enough, I suppose. But yeah, then I gotta watch the movie and do discussion. None of this stuff is due. Let's see, it's the 4th right now. Stuff's due on the 8th and the 9th, so I've still got some time. I'm not in like a huge rush or nothing. But bro, what is this? What is this PowerPoint? What is this PowerPoint? So yeah, when I get to my English part, I'm just gonna ignore that. I'm probably not even gonna do English on here today. I'll probably watch the video lecture and then get offline just so I can go watch the fucking stupid Pride and Prejudice movie. Because I'll definitely get my fucking. I'll get my streams taken down if I just start. Hey guys, let's watch the Pride and Prejudice movies. Um, but yeah, so that's my English. Abysmal. But we're gonna start with my history class because that's pretty straightforward, but it's gonna take fucking forever to get through the history stuff. So I should go ahead and start crushing it now. Let's check out our study guide. Fascinating. The allure of the land. She must be quite hilly, very curvy. Okay, let's see what else there is. The Transcontinental Railroad. Okay. A wounded knee. Did they take an arrow to the knee? What the fuck is the ghost dance? Okay. We're gonna get to learn about Buffalo Bill, my boy. Okay. See what else. Cowboy and Mexican influences, cool. The Christian missionaries in the West. Oh yeah, and they make me watch those fucking crash course videos. No offense to John Greenbro, but I hate watching crash course videos as like a form of learning. It feels so weird and lazy, but whatever. What is this? Okay, yeah, now we gotta read the American Yawp. What do y'all know about the American Yawp? This shit's crazy. It's Wikipedia, but if it was a history book, and so many history professors use the American Yawp. But, like, it literally says right here, the American Yawp is an evolving collaborative text. Please click here to improve this chapter. So I could just edit this shit like a wiki page. I'm gonna go in here and write some heinous shit about famous people. No, I won't do that. But I gotta read this. It says it's like 17 to 30 minutes worth of reading, which is bullshit because it said the same thing on the first module and it took me 45 minutes to fucking read it. I ought to read it out loud since I'm live streaming for the people who don't know how to read, I suppose. How many people in here don't know how to read? Alright, whatever. We're gonna start reading the American Yawp for you guys. Also, apparently, y'all can't see it up here because I've got it hidden, but in the URL bar, it says that the website's not secure. Oh god, I love being in college. Okay, let's start. Introduction. Native Americans long dominated the vastness of the American West. Linked culturally and geographically by trade, travel, and warfare, various indigenous groups controlled most of the continent west of the Mississippi River deep into the 19th century. Spanish, French, British, and later American traders had integrated themselves into many regional economies, and American immigrants pushed ever westward. But no imperial power had yet achieved anything approximating political or military control over the great bulk of the continent. But then the Civil War came and went and decoupled the West from the question of slavery, just as the United States industrialized and laid down rails and pushed its ever expanding population even further west. Indigenous Americans have lived in North America for over 10 millennia and into the late 19th century. Perhaps as many as 250,000 native people still inhabited the American West. But then unending waves of American settlers and the American military and the unstoppable onrush of American capital conquered it all. Often in violation of its own treaties, the United States removed native groups to ever shrinking reservations, incorporated the West first as territories and then as states, and, for the first time in its history, controlled the enormity of land between the two oceans. The history of the late 19th century West is not a simple story. What some touted as a triumph, the westward expansion of American authority, was for others a tragedy. The West contained many people and many places, and their intertwined histories marked a pivotal transformation in the history of the United States. Man, are we gonna get to learn about the how America created, I forget what they're called, but they were pretty much like boarding schools for Native Americans, but they like weren't boarding schools, like it was like heinous shit that they were doing to the Native Americans. I wonder if they're gonna teach us about those. Some of the stories from those are just horrific, bro. Okay. Post Civil War westward migration, baby. In the decades after the Civil War, American settlers poured across the Mississippi River in record numbers. No longer simply crossing over the continent for new imagined Edens in California or Oregon, they settled now in the vast heart of the continent. Oregon Trail reference? Many of the first American migrants had come to the West in search of quick profits during the mid century gold and silver rushes. Oh, the invention of the blue jean. As in the California rush of 1848 to 1849, droves of prospectors poured in after precarious metal strikes in Colorado in 1858, Nevada in 1859, Idaho in 1860, Montana in 1863, and the Black Hills in 1874. While women often performed housework that allowed mining families to subsist in often difficult conditions, a significant portion of the mining workforce were single men without families dependent on service industries in nearby towns and cities. What type of service industries? Pray tell. There, working class women worked in shops. Oh, they're going to tell me. Okay. There, working class women worked in shops, saloons, boarding houses, and brothels. Many of these ancillary, I don't know what that word is, oh, providing necessary support to the primary activities or operation of an organization. Okay. So necessary. They should have just put the word necessary there and saved me the fucking trouble. Whatever. Many of these necessary operations profited from the mining boom. As failed prospectors found, the rush itself often generated more wealth than the mines. Of course. The gold that left Colorado in the first 7 years after the Pikes Peak gold strike, estimated at 25.5 million, was, for instance, less than half of what outside parties had invested in the fever. The 100,000 plus migrants who settled in the Rocky Mountains were ultimately more valuable to the region's development than the gold they came to find. Crazy work. Others came to the plains to extract the hides of the great bison herds. Millions of animals had roamed the plains, but their tough leather supplied industrial belting in eastern factories and raw material for the booming clothing industry. Blue jeans! Blue jeans and belts! Yeah! Specialized teams took down and skinned the herds. The infamous American bison slaughter peaked in the 1870s. Horrific. Yo, what's good, Braden? I'm literally live streaming my classwork. The number of American bison plummeted from over 10 million at mid-century to only a few hundred by the early 1880s. The expansion of the railroads allowed ranching to replace the bison with cattle on the American grasslands. Holy shit! Dude! And they're just standing there like, yeah, man, we killed this many bison. Like, you're gonna make them fucking extinct. I hope I get an A on this shiz. I do not want to take modern American history again. Now, I will say the professor of this modern American history class is somewhat cool. I've got to give it to him because his D2L like background picture is of Captain America punching Hitler. So I thought that was pretty nifty. God, that is so many bison skulls, bro. Thank you for the rose, by the way, Braden. Or the roses, that's 11. Yeah, patriotic as fuck. Frame that shit and put it in my house. Look, America almost destroyed the entire bison population in the United States in the early or the late 1800s. I don't expect no less from my good old boys. Fuck, God. Okay, let's keep reading. Let's keep reading. The nearly 70,000 members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, more commonly called Mormons, is this about Utah? Who migrated west between 1846 and 1868 were similar to other Americans traveling west on the overland trails. They faced many of the same problems, but unlike most other American migrants, Mormons were fleeing from religious persecution. Okay, makes sense. Many historians view Mormonism as uniquely American faith, but not just because it was founded by Joseph Smith in New York in the 1830s, but because of its optimistic and future-oriented tenets. Mormons believed that Americans were exceptional, chosen by God to spread truth across the world and to build utopia, a new Jerusalem in North America. However, many Americans were suspicious of the Latter day Saint movement and its unusual rituals, especially the practice of polygamy, and most Mormons found it difficult to practice their faith in the eastern United States. Thus began a series of migrations in the mid 19th century, first to Illinois, then Missouri and Nebraska, and finally the Utah Territory. Once in the West, Mormon settlements served as important supply joints for other immigrants heading on to California and Oregon. Brigham Young, the leader of the church after the death of Joseph Smith, was appointed governor of the Utah Territory by the federal government in 1850. He encouraged Mormon residents of the territory to engage in agricultural pursuits and be cautious of the outsiders who arrived as the mining and railroad industries developed in the region. So, yeah, those people would not have made it to California if the Mormons had not settled down in Utah. I mean, I could see it. Someone has to settle down in the middle, right? You gotta have somewhere to stop and rest and trade. Alright, interesting. It was land, ultimately, that drew the most migrants to the West. Family farms were the backbone of agricultural economy that expanded in the West after the Civil War. In 1862, Northerners in Congress passed the Homestead Act, which allowed male citizens, or those who declared their intent to become citizens, to claim federally owned lands in the West. Settlers could head west, choose a 160-acre surveyed section of land. Boy, damn, dress me up like a dude, smack my ass. I'm about to head out to the west and get 160 fucking acres of land. Hot shit. File a claim and begin improving the land by plowing fields, building houses and barns, or digging wells, and after 5 years of living on the land, could apply for the official title to the title deed to the land. Oh, so I won't own it. They were using land as credit. But I am not about to go out here and plow and work on this shit if I don't fucking own it. That's crazy. Whatever. I mean, I guess I get it. Hundreds of thousands of Americans used the Homestead Act to acquire land. The treeless plains that had been considered unfit for settlement became the new agricultural mecca for land-hungry Americans. Uh, Boy, they just called me out. I might be one of them land-hungry Americans. The Homestead Act excluded married women from filing claims because they were considered the legal dependents of their husbands. Fuck. Some unmarried women filed claims on their own. But single farmers, male or female, were hard pressed to run a farm, and they were a small minority. Most farm households adopt traditional divisions of labor. Men worked in the fields, and women managed the home and kept the family fed. Both were essential. Migrants sometimes found in homesteads a self sufficiency denied at home. Second or third sons who did not inherit land in Scandinavia, for instance, found farm communities in Minnesota, Dakota, and other Midwestern territories in the 1860s. Boosters encouraged emigration of advertising the Semirid plains. My, how do they spell that shit? Wait, where did I lost it? Oh, there it is. IARID. What does that mean? Okay, so it's dry out there. I'm gonna switch the words up again. Boosters encouraged emigration by advertising the arid plains as, for instance, a flowery meadow of great fertility, clothed in nutritious grasses and watered by numerous streams. It's hairy and wet out there. Western populations exploded. The plains were transformed. In 1860, for example, Kansas had about 10,000 farms. In 1880, it had 239,000. Texas saw enormous population growth. The federal government counted 200,000 people in Texas in 1850, 1.6 million in 1880, and 3 million in 1900, making it the sixth most populous state in the nation. Hell yeah, good for Texas. I'm gonna take another drink, and I'm also gonna check my phone. I'm watching the Warhammer, fuck, listen to me, the Warframe live stream right now so I can get the drops. Why did I look back at my phone and just see shit about Mpreg? It's a Warframe stream. I should actually straight up fucking know better. Okay. And get me a drink too. I'm reading this shit. Apparently reading it out loud is supposed to help you retain the information a lot better, so maybe it'll work. We'll see. Oh, okay. Let's get back into it. The Indian Wars and Federal Peace Policies. The Indian Wars, so mythologized in Western folklore, was a series of seemingly sporadic, localized, and often brief engagements between U.S. military forces and various Native American groups. More sustained and equally impactful conflicts were economic and cultural. Sorry, I blanked out for a second there. New patterns of American settlement, railroad construction, and material extraction clashed with the oh my god. New patterns of American settlement, railroad construction, and material extraction clashed with the vast and cyclical movement across the Great Plains to hunt buffalo, raid enemies, and trade goods. Wow, that was a sentence. Thomas Jefferson's old dream that indigenous nations might live isolated in the West was, in the face of American expansion, no longer a viable reality. Yo, bro. Rude. Political, economic, and even humanitarian concerns intensified American efforts to isolate Native Americans on reservations. Although Indian removal had long been part of federal Indian policy following the Civil War, the U.S. government redoubled its efforts. If treaties and other forms of persistent coercion would not work, federal officials pushed for more drastic measures. After the Civil War, coordinated military actions by celebrity Civil War generals such as William Sherman and William Sheridan exploited and exasperated local conflicts sparked by illegal business ventures and settler incursions. Against the threat of confinement and the extinction of traditional ways of life, Native Americans battled the American army and the encroaching lines of American settlement. You know, it's crazy because the Native Americans probably would have kicked our asses and won if it wasn't for the fact that the white bros were so fucking dirty and full of diseases that it killed like almost all of them. That's how nasty we were when we came over here. That's just crazy. Alright. In one of the earliest Western engagements in 1862, while the Civil War still consumed the United States, tensions erupted between Dakota Nation and white settlers in Minnesota and the Dakota Territory. The 1850 U.S. Census recorded a white population of about 6,000 in Minnesota. 8 years later, then it became a state. It was more than 150,000. The illegal influx of American farmers pushed the Dakota to the breaking point. Hunting became unsustainable, and those Dakota who had taken up farming found only poverty. The federal Indian agent refused to disburse promised food. Many starved. Andrew Myrick, a trader at the agency, refused to sell food on credit. If they are hungry, he is alleged to have said, let them eat grass or their own dung. Oh my god. That's like so much worse than the let them eat cake shit. The genuine malicious. Ah, god, okay. Then, on August 17th, 1862, four young men of the Santees, a Dakota band, killed five white settlers near the Redwood Agency, an American administrative office. In the face of the inevitable American retaliation and over the protest of many members, the tribe chose war. On the following day, Dakota warriors attacked settlements near the agency. They killed 31 men, women, and children, including Myrick, whose mouth was filled with grass. Oh my god. Oh my god! They're better than me. I would have put the dung in his mouth, bro. I would have popped a squat and been like, interesting toilet. Like they filled his mouth with grass. That is fucking crazy. We love it. We love it. Okay. They then ambushed a U.S. military detachment at Redwood Ferry, killing 23. The governor of Minnesota called up militia and several thousand Americans waged war against the indigenous insurgents. Fighting broke out at New Ulm, Fort Ridgely, and Birch Coulee, but the Americans broke indigenous resistance at the Battle of Wood Lake on September 23rd, ending the so-called Dakota War. Look at that. Buffalo Soldiers, the nickname given to African American cavalrymen by the Native Americans they fought, were the first peacetime all-black regiments in the regular United States Army. These soldiers regularly confronted racial prejudice from other Army members and civilians, but were an essential part of American victories during the Indian Wars of the late 19th century and early 20th centuries. That's really cool. Everyone has a sick fucking mustache. Like, there's so many people in this picture that just have a sick fucking mustache. That's crazy. Okay. Alright, let's get back into it. I am nowhere near done with this shit. Damn, boy. Okay. More than 2,000 Dakota had been taken prisoner during the fighting. Many were tried at federal forts for murder, rape, and other atrocities in a kind of legalistic choreography that conveyed American ideas of native guilt and white innocence. Military tribunals convicted 303 Dakota and sentenced them to hang. At the last minute, President Lincoln commuted all but 38 of the sentences. Minnesota settlers and government officials insisted not only that Dakota lose much of their reservation lands and be removed farther west, but that those who had fled be hunted down and placed on reservations as well. The American military gave chase, and on September 3, 1863, after a year of attrition, American military units surrounded a large encampment of Dakota. American troops killed an estimated 300 men and women and children. Dozens more were taken prisoner. Troops spent the next 2 days burning winter food and supply stores to starve out the Dakota resistance, which continued to insist on Dakota sovereignty and treaty rights. Oh my god. Farther south, settlers inflamed tensions in Colorado. In 1851, the first treaty of Fort Laramie, whatever, had secured right-of-way access for Americans passing through on their way to California and Oregon. But a gold rush in 1858 drew approximately 100,000 white gold seekers, and they demanded new treaties be made with local indigenous groups to secure land rights in the newly created Colorado Territory. Cheyenne? I hope that's right. Bands splintered over the possibility of signing a new treaty that would confine them to a reservation. Settlers, already wary of raids by powerful groups of Cheyennes, Arapahoes, and Comanche? I am butchering this shit, I'm so sorry. Meanwhile, read in their local newspapers sensationalist accounts of the uprising in Minnesota. Militia leader John M. Chivington warned settlers in the summer of 1864 that the Cheyenne were dangerous, urged war, and promised a swift military victory. Settlers sparked conflict and sporadic fighting broke out. The aged Cheyenne chief Black Kettle, believing that a peace treaty would be best for his people, traveled to Denver to arrange for peace talks. He and his followers traveled toward Fort Lyon in accordance with government instructions, but on November 29, 1864, Chivington ordered his 700 militiamen to move on the Cheyenne camp near Fort Lyon at Sand Creek. The Cheyenne tried to declare their peaceful intentions, but Chivington's militia cut them down. It was a slaughter. Chivington's men killed 200 men, women, and children. The Sand Creek Massacre was a national scandal, alternately condemned and applauded. What a bitch move! Yeah, like you're gonna wait until their leader is gone, and then you're gonna move in. Like from a tactical standpoint, sure it's smart, but like man up! Oh my god! You really can't win if they're unless their leader's not there. Like you're that bad at your job, bro. Like be so for real. Be so for real. Okay. Cringe. As settler incursions continued to provoke conflict, Americans pushed for a new peace policy. Congress, confronted with these tragedies and further violence, authorized in 1868 the creation of the Indian Peace Commission. The Commission's study of Native Americans decreed prior American policy and galvanized support for reformers. After the inauguration of Ulysses S. Grant the following spring, Congress allied with prominent philanthropists to create the Board of Indian Commissioners, a permanent advisory body to oversee indigenous affairs and prevent the further outbreak of violence. The board effectively Christianized American Indian policy. Much of the reservation system was handed over to Protestant churches, which were tasked with finding agents and missionaries to manage reservation life. Congress hoped that religiously minded men might fare better at creating just assimilation policies and persuading Native Americans to accept them. Historian Francis Paul Prucha believed that this attempt at a new peace policy might just have properly been labeled as the religious policy. Of course. Yes, this is what I was talking about. This is a picture where they were like shoving them off to boarding schools and was like cutting their hair and giving them white names and like forcing them into white clothes. Like it was horrific the shit they did. Hell, it even looks like this guy got his skin bleached. Which like honestly I wouldn't be surprised if they did bleach some people's skin to make them appear white. That or they just maybe it's like a lack of being in the sun, but I don't know. It's God, how horrific. That's a really interesting necklace. Hmm. Okay, let's keep going. And it even says here the Carlisle Indian School, a Native American boarding school founded by the United States government in 1879. Boarding school. Torture facilities. That's what they were. Boarding school. No. Another drink. Another drink. Mmm. I love Sundrop. Okay. Okay, wait. I'm burping. Alright. Let's go. Many female Christian missionaries played a central role in cultural re-education programs that attempted to not only instill Protestant religion, but also impose traditional American gender roles and family structures. They endeavored to replace indigenous peoples' tribal social units with small, patriarchal households. Women's labor became a contentious issue because few tribes divided labor according to the gender norms of middle and upper class Americans. Field work, the traditional domain of white males, was primarily performed by Native women, who also usually controlled the products of their labor, if not the land that was worked, giving them status in society as laborers and food providers. For missionaries, the goal was to get Native women to leave the fields and engage in more proper women's work, housework. Christian missionaries performed much as secular federal agents had. Few American agents could meet Native Americans on their own terms. Most Americans viewed indigenous peoples on reservations as lazy and thought of indigenous cultures as inferior to their own. The views of J. L. Broadus, appointed to oversee several small tribes on the Hoopa Valley reservations in California, are illustrative. In his annual report to the Commissioner of Indian Affairs for 1875, he wrote, "The majority of them are idle, listless, careless, and improvident. They seem to take no thought about provision for the future, and many of them would not work at all if they were not compelled to do so. They would rather live upon the roots and acorns gathered by their women than to work for flour and beef." Who gives a fuck? Let them be. Leave them alone. If indigenous peoples could not be forced through kindness to change their ways, most Americans agreed that it was acceptable to use force, which native groups resisted. Obviously. In Texas and the Southern Plains, the Comanche, the Kiowa, and their allies had wielded enormous influence. The Comanche, in particular, controlled huge swaths of territory and raided vast areas, inspiring terror from the Rocky Mountains to the interior of northern Mexico to the Texas Gulf Coast. But after the Civil War, the U.S. military refocused its attention on the Southern Plains. The American military first sent messengers to the plains to find the elusive Comanche bands. Comanche? I'm so sorry. And asked them to come to peace negotiations at Medicine Lodge Creek in the fall of 1867. But terms were muddled. American officials believed that the Comanche bands had accepted reservation life, while Comanche leaders believed they were guaranteed vast lands for buffalo hunting. Comanche bands used designated reservation lands as a base from which to collect supplies and federal annuity goods, while continuing to hunt, trade, and raid American settlements in Texas. Confronted with renewed Comanche raiding, particularly by the famed war leader Quanah Parker, I hope I pronounced that right, the U.S. military finally proclaimed that all indigenous peoples who were not settled on the reservation by the fall of 1874 would be considered hostile. Holy shit. The Red River War began when many Comanche bands refused to resettle, and the American military launched expeditions into the plains to subdue them, culminating in the defeat of the remaining roaming bands in the canyonlands of the Texas Panhandle. Cold and hungry, with their way of life already decimated by soldiers, settlers, cattlemen, and railroads, the last free Comanche bands were moved to the reservation at Fort Sill in what is now southwestern Oklahoma. On the northern plains, I'm about to just Google this one. I'm not even going to try. How to pronounce
Sioux.
Sioux? I hope. Okay. On the northern plains, the Sioux people had yet to finally surrender. Following the military defeats of 1862, many bands had signed treaties with the United States and drifted into the Red Cloud and Spotted Tail agencies to collect rations and annuities, but many continued to resist American encroachment, particularly during Red Cloud's War, a rare victory for the Plains people that resulted in the Treaty of 1868 and created the flooded territory. Oh, and created the Great Sioux Reservation. I skipped along. Then, in 1874, an American expedition to the Black Hills of South Dakota discovered gold. Oh no. White prospectors flooded the territory. Oh my god! Okay, who would have guessed? We find gold. Suddenly, the dudes are just shoving themselves in the. Oh god, okay. Caring very little about indigenous rights and very much about getting rich. They brought the Sioux situation again to its breaking point, aware that U.S. citizens were violating treaty provisions but unwilling to prevent them from searching for gold. Federal officials pressured the Western Sioux to sign a new treaty that would transfer control of the Black Hills to the United States, while General Philip Sheridan quietly moved U.S. troops into the region. Initial clashes between U.S. troops and Sioux warriors resulted in several Sioux victories that, combined with the visions of Sitting Bull, who had dreamed of an even more triumphant victory, attracted Sioux bands who had already signed treaties but now joined to fight. In late June 1876, a division of the 7th Cavalry Regiment led by Lieutenant Colonel George Armstrong Custer was set up a trail in the Black Hills as an advance guard for a larger force. Custer's men approached a camp along a river known to the Sioux as Greasy Grass, but marked on Custer's camp as Little Bighorn. And they found that the influx of treaty Sioux, as well as aggrieved Cheyenne, Shan, and other allies, had swelled the population of the village far beyond Custer's estimation. Custer's 7th Cavalry was vastly outnumbered, and he and 268 of his men were killed. Custer's fall shocked the nation. Cries for a swift American response filled the public sphere, and the military expeditions were sent out to crush native resistance. The Sioux splintered off into the wilderness and began a campaign of intermittent resistance, but, outnumbered and suffering after a long journey, hungry winter, Crazy Horse led a band of Oglala Sioux, I hope that's right, to surrender in May 1877. Other bands gradually followed until finally, in July 1881, Sitting Bull and his followers at last laid down their weapons and came to the reservation. Indigenous powers had been defeated. The plains, it seemed, had been pacified. That's heartbreaking, dude. That's like really. Mm, damn. That's really fucking sad. I'm gonna have to get a snack at some point. My tummy is a rumbling. But we're gonna keep reading. I'll probably get a snack after I get done reading the yop. The yop. Okay. Plains peoples were not the only ones who suffered as a result of American expansion. Groups like the. Oh, fuck. The Utes? The Utes? And the Poites? I'm so sorry. Were pushed out of the Rocky Mountains by U.S. expansion into Colorado and away from the northern Great Basin by the expanding Mormon population in Utah Territory in the 1850s and 1860s. Faced with a shrinking territorial base, members of the two groups often joined the U.S. military in its campaigns in the Southwest against other powerful native groups like the Hopi, the Zuni, the Jicarilla Apache, and especially the Navajo, whose population of at least 10,000 engaged in both farming and sheep herding on some of the most valuable lands acquired by the United States after the Mexican War. Conflicts between the U.S. military, American settlers, and native nations increased throughout the 1850s. By 1862, General James Carleton began searching for a reservation where he could remove the Navajo and end their threat to the U.S. expansion in the Southwest. Carleton selected a dry, almost treeless site in the Bosque Redondo Valley, 300 miles from the Navajo homeland. 300 miles! In April 1863, Carleton gave orders to Colonel Kit Carson to round up the entire Navajo population and escort them to Bosque Redondo. Those who resisted would be shot. Thus began a period of Navajo history called the Long Walk, which remains deeply important to Navajo people today. The Long Walk was not a single event, but a series of forced marches to the reservation at Bosque Redondo between August 1863 and December 1866. Holy shit. Conditions at Bosque Redondo were horrible. Provisions provided by the U.S. Army were not only inadequate, but often spoiled. Disease was rampant, and thousands of Navajos died. By 1868, it had become clear that life at the reservation was unsustainable. General William Tecumseh Sherman visited the reservation and wrote of the inhumane situation in which the Navajo were essentially kept as prisoners, but lack of cost effectiveness was the main reason Sherman recommended that the Navajo be returned to their homeland in the West. On June 1st, 1868, the Navajo signed the Treaty of Bosque Redondo, an unprecedented treaty in the history of U.S. Native relations in which the Navajo were able to return from the reservation to their homeland. The attacks on native nations in California and the Pacific Northwest received significantly less attention than the dramatic conquest of the plains. But native peoples in these regions also experienced violence, population decline, and territorial loss. For example, in 1872, the California-Oregon border erupted in violence when the Modoc people left the reservation of the Klamath Nation, onto which they had been forced, and returned to their homelands in an area known as Lost River. Americans had settled the region after Modoc removal several years before, and they complained bitterly of the natives' return. The U.S. military arrived when 52 remaining Modoc warriors, led by Kintpush, known to settlers as Captain Jack, refused to return to the reservation and hold up in defensive positions along the state border. They fought a guerrilla war for 11 months, in which at least 200 U.S. troops were killed before they were finally forced to surrender. Damn. Despite appeals from the settlers acquainted with the Modoc, the federal government hanged Quinposh and 3 other leaders in a highly choreographed and publicized public execution. God, talk about sore losers. Dude, they won. Oh, okay. 4 years later, in the Pacific Northwest, a branch of the Nez Perce, who generations earlier had aided Lewis and Clark in their famous journey to the Pacific Ocean, that's cool, refused to be moved to a reservation and, under the leadership of, oh no, I'm gonna try my best. Hinmatuya Latkekt. Oh, I know I just said that so wrong. I'm so sorry. Known to settlers and American readers as Chief Joseph. His name sounds nothing like that, but okay, whatever. Attempted to flee to Canada, but were pursued by the U.S. cavalry. The outnumbered Nez Perce. I'm just gonna say Nez Perce because I think that's what it is. Nez Perce. There's no tittle over the E, so Nez Perce. That's what we'll go with. The outnumbered Nez Perce battled across 1,000 miles and were attacked nearly 24 times before they succumbed to hunger and exhaustion, surrendered, were imprisoned, and removed to a reservation in Indian Territory. The flight of the Nez Perce captured the attention of the United States, and a transcript of Chief Joseph's surrender, as allegedly recorded by a U.S. Army officer, became a landmark of American rhetoric. "Hear me, my chiefs," Joseph was supposed to have said. "I am tired, my heart is sick and sad. From where the sun now stands, I will fight no more forever." Chief Joseph used his celebrity and, after several years, negotiated his people's relocation to a reservation nearer to their historic home. The treaties that had been signed with numerous native nations in California in the 1850s were never ratified by the Senate. Over 100 distinct native groups lived in California before the Spanish and American conquests, but by 1880 the native population of California had collapsed from about 150,000 on the eve of the gold rush to a little less than 20,000. A few reservation areas were eventually set up by the U.S. government to collect what remained of the native population, but most were dispersed throughout California. This was partly the result of state laws from the 1850s that allowed white Californians to obtain both native children and adults as apprentice laborers by merely bringing the desired laborer before a judge and promising to feed, clothe, and eventually release them after a period of service. What? That ranged from 10 to 20 years. Thousands of California's natives were thus pressed into a form of slave labor that supported the growing mining, agricultural, railroad, and cattle industries. So you're telling me that we are fighting this whole fucking civil war. We're fighting this whole fucking civil war. And these motherfuckers are like, oh, well, they're trying to get rid of my slaves. So they just go find more? What the fuck? Oh my god, this just keeps getting worse. Huh. I thought the boarding schools were fucking bad. This is heinous. They didn't even go into the boarding schools that deep. The boarding schools, when I watched a video on them one time, and learning about the boarding schools that they sent the Native Americans to was just, like some of the stuff that happened just made me sick to my stomach, bro. Like, it's just so bad. Alright. I'm gonna take a little sip, and then I'm gonna pause to go use the restroom. And then I'll come back and keep reading for you guys. Okay, I'm back. Pull my sleeves down here. Oh, what are we getting into next? We're almost halfway done with the American Yawp. Sorry, my hair was getting in the way. Okay. So now we're in the Western economic expansion, railroads and cattle. Hmm. I really like trains. It sucks that these trains that we have just killed a bunch of people. Jeez. Okay, get into it. Western economic expansion, railroads, and cattle. Aside from agriculture and the extraction of natural resources, such as timber and precious metals, two major industries fueled the new Western economy: ranching and railroads. Both developed in connection with each other, accelerated the inrush of settlers displacing native peoples out, and shaped the collective American memory of the post Civil War Wild West. Oh boy, we're getting into the cowboys. Yes. As one booster put it, the West is purely a railroad enterprise. No economic enterprise rivaled the railroads in scale, scope, or sheer impact. No other businesses had attracted such enormous sums of capital, and no other ventures ever received such lavish government subsidies. Business historian Alfred Chandler called the railroads the first modern business enterprise. By annihilating time and space, by connecting the vastness of the continent, the railroads transformed the United States and made the American West. Check that out. That's a map of the railroads. Damn. God, they look at how far it goes. That's crazy. Okay, cool. No railroad enterprise so captured the American imagination or federal support as the Transcontinental Railroad. The Transcontinental Railroad crossed western plains and mountains and linked the West Coast with the rail networks of the eastern United States. Constructed from the west by the Central Pacific and from the east by the Union Pacific. The two roads were linked in Utah in 1869 to great national fanfare. But such a Herculean task was not easy, and national legislators threw enormous subsidies at railroad companies, a part of the Republican Party platform since 1856. The 1862 Pacific Railroad Act gave bonds of between $16,000 and $48,000 for each mile of construction and provided vast land grants to railroad companies. That was a fuck ton of money. A baby deer hit the door? Aren't you at work? Like there's a baby deer in town that hit the door? What? Bro, how did it even get there? That's all the way in town. That's wild. That's actually crazy. Between 1850 and 1871 alone, railroad companies received more than 175 million acres of public land, and area larger than the state of Texas. Investors reaped enormous profits, as one congressional opponent put it in the 1870s: if there be profit, the corporations may take it. If there be loss, the government must bear it. Wow, nothing's changed. That's insane that there's just a deer just in the middle of town that tried to go into the game store. That's crazy work. Okay. If railroads attracted unparalleled subsidies and investments, they also created enormous labor demands. By 1880, approximately 400,000 men, or nearly 2.5% of the nation's entire workforce, labored in the railroad industry. Much of the work was dangerous and low paying, and companies relied heavily on immigrant labor to build tracks. Companies employed Irish workers in the early 19th centuries and Chinese workers in the late 19th century. By 1880, over 200,000 Chinese migrants lived in the United States. Once the rails were laid, companies still needed a large workforce to keep the trains running. Much railroad work was dangerous, but perhaps the most hazardous work was done by the brakemen. Before the advent of automatic braking, an engineer would blow the down brake whistle, and brakemen would scramble to the top of the moving train, regardless of the weather conditions, and run from car to car, manually turning brakes. What? Wow. Speed was necessary and any slip could be fatal. Yeah. Brakemen were also responsible for coupling the cars, attaching them together with a large pin. It was easy to lose a hand or finger, and even a slight mistake could cause cars to collide. That's crazy. The railroads boomed. In 1850, there were 9,000 miles of railroads in the United States. In 1900, there were 190,000, including several transcontinental lines. To manage these vast networks of freight and passenger lines, companies converged rails at hub cities. Of all the Midwestern and Western cities that blossomed from the bridging of Western resources in the Eastern capital in the late 19th century, Chicago was the most spectacular. It grew from 200 inhabitants in 1883 to over a million by 1890. By 1893, it and the region from which it drew were completely transformed. The World's Columbian Exposition that year trumpeted the city's progress and border technological progress, with typical Gilded Age ostentation. A huge, gleaming, but temporary, white city was built in neoclassical style to house all the features of the fair and cater to the needs of the visitors who arrived from all over the world. Highlighted in the title of this World's Fair were the changes that had overtaken North America since Columbus made landfall 4 centuries earlier. Chicago became the most important western hub and served as the gateway between the farm and ranch country of the Great Plains and eastern markets. Railroads brought cattle from Texas to Chicago for slaughter, where they were then processed into packaged meats and shipped by refrigerated rail to New York City and other eastern cities. Such hubs became the central nodes in a rapid transit economy that increasingly spread across the entire continent, linking goods and people together in the new national network. That's pretty interesting. This national network created the fabled cattle drives of the 1860s and 1870s. The first cattle drives across the Central Plains began soon after the Civil War. Railroads created the market for ranching, and for the few years after the war, that railroads connected eastern markets with important market hubs such as Chicago, but had yet to reach Texas ranch lands. Ranchers began driving cattle north out of the Lone Star State to major railroad terminuses in Kansas, Missouri, and Nebraska. Ranchers used well-worn trails such as the Chisholm Trail for drives, but conflicts arose with Native Americans in the Indian Territory and farmers in Kansas who disliked the intrusion of large and environmentally destructive herds onto their own hunting, ranching, and farming lands. Other trails, such as the Western Trail, the Goodnight Lovin' Trail, and the Shawnee Trail, were therefore blazed. You mean they were getting blazed on them? No. Oh, okay, this is a photochrome print where they would like take the picture and then color it in later. This is cool. It's part of the cattle drives. Look at how gorgeous that shit is, bro. Look at how pretty that is. Look at how pretty all this land is. And then some motherfucker walked up and said, let's put a Dollar General right there. I swear. Here, I'll see so y'all can check out the cowboy picture. Cattle drives were difficult tasks for the crews of men who managed the herds. Historians estimate the number of men who worked as cowboys in the late 19th century to be between 12,000 and 40,000. Perhaps a fourth were African American, and more were likely Mexican or Mexican American. Much about the American cowboys evolved from the Mexican vaqueros. Cowboys adopted Mexican practices, gear, and terms for such as rodeo, bronco, and lasso. While most cattle drivers were men, there were at least 16 verifiable counts of women participating in the drives. Some, like Molly Dyer Goodnight, accompanied their husbands. Others, like Lizzie Johnson Williams, helped drive their own herds. Williams made at least 3 known trips with her herds up the Chisholm Trail. Many cowboys hoped one day to become ranch owners themselves, but employment was insecure and wages were low. Beginners could expect to earn around $20 to $25 per month, and those with years of experience might earn $40 to $45. Trail bosses could earn over $50 per month, and it was tough work. On a cattle drive, cowboys worked long hours and faced extremes of heat and cold and intense blowing dust. They subsisted on limited diets with irregular supplies. God, we're all just broke and dying out here, dude. That's crazy. That's alright. There is a gnat flying around my PC, and I'm about to go to war. with it. I didn't get it. I don't know if I got it or not. No, I don't see it anymore. Okay. But if workers of cattle earned low wages, owners and investors could receive riches. At the end of the Civil War, a steer worth $4 in Texas could fetch $40 in Kansas. Although profits slowly leveled off, large profits could still be made. And yet, by the 1880s, the great cattle drives were largely done. The railroads had created them, and the railroads ended them. Railroad lines pushed into Texas and made the great drives obsolete. But ranching still brought profits, and the plains were better suited for grazing than for agriculture, and Western ranchers continued supplying beef for national markets. Ranching was just one of many Western industries that depended on the railroads. By linking the plains with national markets and rapidly moving people and goods, the railroads made the modern American West. Cool. Yo, these guys got the drip on. The fits are so hard. That is crazy. Bro, I could never look that cool. That's crazy. Okay, let's get into it. Chapter 6, The Allotment Era and Resistance in the Native West. As the rails moved into the West and more Americans followed, the situation for Native groups deteriorated even further. Treaties negotiated between the United States and Native groups had typically promised that if tribes agreed to move to specific reservation lands, they would hold those lands collectively. But as American westward migration mounted and open lands closed, white settlers began to argue that Native people had more than their fair share of land, that the reservations were too big, that Native people were using the land inefficiently, and that they still preferred nomadic hunting instead of intensive farming and ranching. Bro, that's their you broke into their house and then said, "I don't like the way you decorated your living room. I'm about to change it." Like that's crazy. By the 1880s, Americans increasingly championed legislation to allow the transfer of indigenous lands to farmers and ranchers. While many argued that allotting land to individual Native Americans rather than to tribes would encourage American style agriculture and finally put indigenous peoples who had previously resisted the efforts of missionaries and federal officials on the path to civilization. Passed by Congress on February 8, 1887, the Dawes General Allotment Act splintered Native American reservations into individual family homesteads. Each head of the native family was to be allotted 160 acres, the typical size of a claim that any settler could establish on federal lands under the provisions of the Homestead Act. Single individuals over age 18 would receive an 80-acre allotment, and orphan children received 40 acres. A 4-year timeline was established for indigenous peoples to make their allotment selections. If at the end of that time no selection had been made, the act authorized the Secretary of the Interior to appoint an agent to make selections for the remaining tribal members. Allegedly to protect Native Americans from being swindled by unscrupulous land speculators, all allotments were to be held in trust. They could not be sold by allottees for 25 years. Lands that remained unclaimed by tribal members after allotment would revert to federal control and be sold to American settlers. God, the fit is so hard. Wow. Americans touted the Dawes Act as an uplifting humanitarian reform, but it upended Native lifestyles and left Native nations without sovereignty over their lands. The act claimed that to protect Native property rights, it was necessary to extend the protection of the laws of the United States over the Indians. Tribal governments and legal principles could be superseded, or dissolved and replaced by U.S. laws. Under the terms of the Dawes Act, Native nations struggled to hold on to some measure of tribal sovereignty. The stresses of conquest unsettled generations of Native Americans. Many took comfort from the words of prophets and holy men. In Nevada on January 1st, 1889, I'm not going to be able to pronounce this right, I'm so sorry. Northern White prophet Wavoka experienced a great revelation. He had traveled, he said, from his earthly home in western Nevada to heaven and returned during a solar eclipse to prophesy to his people. You must not hunt anybody or do harm to anyone. You must not fight. Do right always. He allegedly exhorted. and they must, he said, participate in a religious ceremony that came to be known as the ghost dance. Oh, here's that thing that was on the study sheet. If the people lived justly and danced the ghost dance, Wovoka said, their ancestors would rise from the dead, droughts would dissipate, the whites in the west would vanish, and the buffalo would once again roam the plains. Okay, that's interesting. Native American prophets had often confronted American imperial power. Some prophets, including Wovoka, incorporated Christian elements like heaven and the Messiah figure into indigenous spiritual traditions. And so, though it was far from unique, Wovoka's prophecy nevertheless caught on quickly and spread beyond the Poits. From across the West, members of the Arapaho, Bannock, Cheyenne, and Shoshone nations, among others, adopted the ghost dance religion. Perhaps the most avid ghost dancers, and certainly the most famous, were the Lakota Sioux. The Lakota were in dire straits. South Dakota, formed out of land that belonged by treaty to the Lakota, became a state in 1889. White homesteaders had poured in, reservations were carved up and diminished, starvation set in, corrupt federal agents cut food rations, and drought hit the plains. Many Lakota feared a future as the landless subjects of a growing American empire when a delegation of 11 men led by Kicking Bear joined ghost dance pilgrims on the rails westward to Nevada and returned to spread the revival in the Dakotas. The energy and message of the revivals frightened settlers and Indian agents. Newly arrived Pine Ridge agent Daniel Royer sent fearful dispatches to Washington and the press urging a military crackdown. Newspapers, meanwhile, sensationalized the ghost dance. Agents began arresting Lakota leaders. Chief Sitting Bull and several others were killed in December 1890 during a botched arrest, convincing many bands to flee to the reservations to join fugitive bands farther west. No, convincing many bands to flee the reservations to join fugitive bands farther west, where Lakota adherents of the ghost dance preached that the ghost dancers would be immune to bullets. Mm. Forgive me, I simply needed a drink of water. 2 weeks later, an American cavalry unit intercepted a band of 350 Lakota, including over 100 women and children, under Chief Spotted Elk, later known as Bigfoot. Is this where we get the Bigfoot stories from? Seeking refuge at the Pine Ridge Agency. They were escorted to Wounded Knee Creek, where they camped for the night. The following morning, December 29th, the American cavalrymen entered the camp to disarm Spotted Elk's band. Tensions flared, a shot was fired, and a skirmish became a massacre. The Americans fired their heavy weaponry indiscriminately into the camp. 24 cavalrymen had been killed by the Lakotas' concealed weapons or by friendly fire, but when the guns went silent, between 150 and 300 native men, women, and children were dead. Oh my gosh. Okay. Wow. Oh, that's horrific. Wounded Knee marked the end of sustained armed Native American resistance on the plains. Individuals continued to resist the pressures of assimilation and preserve traditional cultural practices, but sustained military defeats. The loss of sovereignty over land and resources and the onset of crippling poverty on the reservations marked the final decades of the 19th century as a particularly dark era for Americans' Western tribes. But for Americans, it became mythical. Horrific! This is all so horrific! The more I read, the more I'm like, oh my god, like, will it ever stop? No. Horrific. Okay. I'm getting real depressed. uh, take another sip of my drink here. My throat's getting a little sore from all the reading. Again, more absolutely phenomenal drip. The fit is hard. Alright. Chapter 7 Rodeos, Wild West Shows, and the Mythic American West. The American West conjures visions of teepees, cabins, cowboys, Native Americans, farm wives in sunbonnets, and outlaws with six shooters. Such images pervade American culture, but they are as old as the West itself. Novels, rodeos, and Wild West shows mythologize the American West throughout the post-Civil War era. Oh my god, that is a huge paragraph. Okay. In the 1860s, Americans devoured dime novels that embellished the lives of real life individuals such as Calamity Jane and Billy the Kid. Owen Wister's novels, especially The Virginian, established the character of the cowboy as a gritty stoic with a rough exterior, but the courage and heroism needed to rescue people from train robbers, Native Americans, and cattle rustlers. Such images were later reinforced with the emergence of rodeo added to popular conceptions of the American West. Rodeos began as small roping and riding contests among cowboys in towns near ranches or at camps at the end of the cattle trails. In Pecos, Texas, on July 4th, 1883, cowboys from two ranches, the Hash Knife and the W Ranch, competed in roping and riding contests as a way to settle an argument. This event is recognized by historians of the West as the first real rodeo. Casual contests evolved into planned celebrations. Many were scheduled around national holidays such as Independence Day or during traditional roundup times in the spring and fall. Early rodeos took place in open grassy areas, not arenas, and included calf and steer roping and rough stock events such as bronc riding. They gained popularity and soon dedicated rodeo circuits developed. Although about 90% of rodeo contestants were men, women helped popularize the rodeo, and several popular female bronc riders, such as Bertha Kaepernick, entered men's events until around 1916 when women's competitive participation was curtailed. Americans also experienced the Wild West, the mythical West imagined in so many dime novels, by attending traveling Wild West shows, arguably the unofficial national entertainment of the United States from the 1880s to the 1910s. Wildly popular across the country, the shows traveled throughout the eastern United States and even across Europe and showcased what was already a mythic frontier life. William Frederick Buffalo Bill Cody was the first to recognize the broad national appeal of the stock characters of the American West cowboys, Indians, sharpshooters, cavalrymen, and rangers and put them all together into a single massive traveling extravaganza. Operating out of Omaha, Nebraska, Buffalo Bill launched his touring show in 1883. Cody himself shunned the word show, fearing that it implied an exaggeration or misinterpretation of the West. He instead called his production Buffalo Bill's Wild West. He employed real cowboys and Native Americans in his productions, but it was still, of course, a show. It was entertainment, little different in its broad outlines from contemporary theater. Storylines depicted westward migration, life on the plains, and indigenous attacks, all punctuated by cowboy fun, bucking broncos, roping cattle, and sharpshooting contests. This picture is so awkwardly threatening. Brother, you're doing what? I am coming. Okay, bro. Don't, maybe? Dude, what is this? Oh, God. Okay, whew. That is not what I was expecting to see when I scrolled down. That's so funny. Okay. Buffalo Bill, joined by shrewd business partners skilled in marketing, turned his shows into a sensation. But he was not alone. Gordon William Pawnee Bill, Lilly, another popular Wild West showman, got his start in 1886 when Cody employed him as an interpreter for Pawnee members of the show. Lilly went on to create his own production in 1888, Pawnee Bill's Historic Wild West. He was Cody's only real competitor in the business until 1908 when the two men combined their shows to create a new extravaganza. Buffalo Bill's Wild West and Pawnee Bill's Great Far East. Most people called it the Two Bills Show. It was an unparalleled spectacle. The cast included American cowboys, Mexican vaqueros, Native Americans, Russian Cossacks, Japanese acrobats, and an Australian Aboriginal. Where are they finding all these people? Cody and Lilly knew that Native Americans fascinated audiences in the United States and Europe, and both featured them prominently in their Wild West shows. Most Americans believed that Native cultures were disappearing or had already, and felt a sense of urgency to see their dances, hear their song, and be captivated by their bareback riding skills and their elaborate buckskin and feather attire. Y'all moved in and were like, I don't like these people, get them out, get them out, get them out, I don't like these people, I don't like these people. You took over everything they owned. And now you're like, well, the culture's dying. I have to see it before it goes. Oh my God. I hate y'all. The shows certainly veiled their true cultural and historic value of so many Native demonstrations, and the Native performers were curiosities to white Americans, but the shows were one of the few ways for Native Americans to make a living in the 19th century. In an attempt to appeal to women, Cody recruited Annie Oakley, a female sharpshooter who thrilled onlookers with her many stunts. Billed as Little Sure Shot, she shot apples off her poodle's head and the ash of her husband's cigar, clenched trustingly between his teeth. What? Gordon, Lily's wife, Gordon Lily's wife, May Manning Lilly, also became a skilled shot and performed as world's greatest lady horseback shot. Female sharpshooters were Wild West show staples. As many as 80 toured the country at the show's peak. But if such acts challenged expected Victorian gender roles, female performers were typically careful to blunt criticism by maintaining their feminine identity. For example, by riding side saddle and wearing full skirts and corsets during their acts. Oh my god. The Western Cowboys and Indians mystique, perpetrated in novels, rodeos, and Wild West shows, was rooted in romantic nostalgia and perhaps in the anxieties that many felt in the late 19th century new seemingly soft industrial world of factory and office work. The mythical cowboy's aggressive masculinity was the seemingly perfect antidote for middle and upper class city dwelling Americans who feared they had become over civilized and longed for what Theodore Roosevelt called the strenuous life. Roosevelt himself, a scion of a wealthy New York, famously and later a popular American president, turned a brief tenure as a failed Dakota ranch owner into a potent part of his political image. Americans looked longingly to the West, whose romance would continue to pull at generations of Americans. Hmm. Recording of the Blackfoot Chief Mountain Chief in 1916. Interesting. God, the recorder's microphone is so large it had to have its own stand. In 1893, the American Historical Association met during the year's World's Columbian Exposition in Chicago. The young Wisconsin historian Frederick Jackson Turner presented his frontier thesis, one of the most influential theories of American history. In his essay, The Significance of the Frontier in American History, Turner looked back at the historical changes in the West and saw, instead of a tsunami of war and plunder and industry, waves of civilization that washed across the continent. A frontier line between savagery and civilization had moved west from the earliest English settlements in Massachusetts and Virginia across the Appalachians to the Mississippi and finally across the plains to California and Oregon. Turner invited his audience to stand at Cumberland Gap, the famous pass through the Appalachian Mountains, and watch the procession of civilization, marching single file, the buffalo following the trail to the salt springs, the Native American, the fur trader and hunter, the cattle raiser, the pioneer farmer, and the frontier had passed by. Americans, Turner said, had been forced by necessity to build a rough-hewn civilization out of the frontier. Giving the nation its exceptional hustle and its democratic spirit and distinguishing North America from the stale monarchies of Europe. Moreover, the style of history Turner called for was democratic as well, arguing that the work of ordinary people, in this case pioneers, deserved the same study as that of great statesmen. Such was a novel approach in 1893. But Turner looked ominously to the future. The Census Bureau in 1890 had declared the frontier closed. There was no longer a discernible line running north to south that, Turner said, any longer divided civilization from savagery. Turner worried for the United States' future. What would become of the nation without the safety valve of the frontier? It was a common sentiment. Theodore Roosevelt wrote to Turner that his essay put into shape a good deal of thought that has been floating around rather loosely. The history of the West was made by many persons and peoples. Turner's thesis was rife with faults, not only in its bald Anglo-Saxon chauvinism in which non-whites fell before the march of civilization, and Chinese and Mexican immigrants were invisible, but in its utter inability to appreciate the impact of technology and government subsidies and large-scale economic enterprises along the work of hardy pioneers. Still, Turner's thesis held an almost canonical position among historians for much of the 20th century and, more importantly, captured Americans' enduring romanticization of the West and the simplification of a long and complicated story into a march of progress. Whoa, we did it! How long have I been streaming? let's just shave off that 17 minutes. They said it was a 17-minute to a 30-minute read, and it has taken me an hour to read this. Now, I don't think I am particularly slow at reading. So imagine someone who is particularly slow at reading, who may have like issues with reading or dyslexia or something. I need this professor to quit lying to me. I need all of the professors to quit lying to me. Please, please. Just tell me how long it's actually going to take. This is insane. Okay. Well, we have read The Great American Yawp, so we're going to have to move on. Oh, fuck, it's a crash course video. We're going to have to move on to the crash course video, fellas. So for right now, since I've been reading for an hour and my throat hurts violently, um, I am going to take a break on stream, go find me a little snack. Um, should take me 10-15 minutes and I'll be back. Alrighty. All right, everyone, I'm back. I'm back. I got myself my little snack. Had my break. We're having a protein pack. Let's watch this crash course video.
Hi, I'm John Green. This is Crash Course U.S.
Oh, y'all
History,
can't
and
see
today
all of
we
it.
leave behind the world of industry and corporations to talk about the wild, wild West. Spoiler
Well,
alert,
y'all just have to deal
we are
with a
done
shitty
with
screen view. I'm
dysentery.
sorry.
And in the process, we're going to explore how all of us, even those of us who are vegans or eat sustainably produced food, benefit from massive agribusiness that has its roots in the wild, wild West. The West still looms large in American mythology as the home of cowboys and gunslingers and houses of ill repute and freedom from pesky government interference, but in fact, it was probably not as wild as we've been told. Ugh, Mr. Green, why can't America live up to its myths just once? Because this is America, me from the past, home to Hollywood and Gatsby and Honey Boo Boo. We are literally in the myth-making business. So before the Hollywood Western, the myth of the frontier probably found its best expression in Frederick Jackson Turner's 1893 lecture, The Significance of the Frontier in American History. Turner argued that the West was responsible for key characteristics of American culture, beliefs in individualism, political democracy, and economic mobility. Like, for 18th and 19th century Americans, the Western frontier represented the opportunity to start over, and possibly to strike it rich.
Dude, okay, wait. Let's backtrack real quick. How come in all of these pictures of these people from like the Old West and stuff, why is everyone standing so far apart? Like I've never understood that. They always stand so far apart. Okay, okay.
Frontier represented the opportunity to start over and possibly to strike it rich by dint of one's own individual effort, even back when the West was like Ohio. In this mythology, the West was a magnet for restless young men who lit out for the uncorrupted, unoccupied, untamed territories to seek their fortune. But in reality, most Western settlers went not as individuals, but as members of a family or as part of an immigrant group. And they weren't filling up unoccupied space either, because most of that territory was home to American Indians. Also, in addition to Easterners and migrants from Europe, the West was settled by Chinese people and by Mexican migrant laborers and former slaves. Plus, there were plenty of Mexicans living there already who became Americans with the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo. And the whole West as a place of rugged individualism and independence turns out to be an oversimplification. I mean, the federal government, after all, had to pass the law that spurred homesteading, then had to clear out American Indians already living there, and had to sponsor the railroads that allowed the West to grow in the first place. About as individualistic as the government buying Walden Pond for Henry David Thoreau. What's that? It's a state park now? The government owns it? Well, there you go. Now, railroads didn't create the desire to settle the West, but they did make it possible for people who wanted to live out west to do so for two reasons. First, without railroads, there would be no way to bring crops or other goods to market. I mean, I guess you could dig a canal across Kansas, but if you've ever been to Kansas, that is not a tantalizing proposition. Second, railroads made life in the West profitable and livable because they brought the goods that people needed, such as tools for planting and sowing, shoes for wearing, books for putting on your shelf and pretending to have read. Railroads allowed settlers to stay connected with the modernity that was becoming the hallmark of the industrialized world in the 19th century. Now, we saw last week that the federal government played a key role in financing the Transcontinental Railroad, but state governments got into the act too, often to their financial detriment. In fact, so many states nearly went bankrupt financing railroads that most states now have constitutional requirements that they balance their budgets. But perhaps the central way that the federal government supported the railroads and Western settlement and investment in general was by leading military expeditions against American Indians, rounding them up on ever smaller reservations and destroying their culture. Let's go to the thought bubble. There was an economic as well as a racial imperative to move the Native Americans off their land. White people wanted it. Initially, it was needed to set down railroad tracks and then for farming, but eventually it was also exploited for minerals like gold and iron and other stuff that makes industry work. I mean, would you really want a territory called the Badlands unless it had valuable minerals? Early Western settlement of the Oregon Trail kind did not result in huge conflicts with Native Americans, but by the 1850s, a steady stream of settlers kicked off increasingly bloody conflicts that lasted pretty much until 1890. Even though the fighting started before the Civil War, the end of the war between the states meant a new, more violent phase in the warring between American Indians and whites. General Philip H. Little Phil Sheridan set out to destroy the Indians' way of life, burning villages and killing their horses, and especially the buffalo that was the basis of the Plains tribe's existence. There were about 30 million buffalo in the U.S. in 1800, by 1886, the Smithsonian Institute had difficulty finding 25 good specimens. In addition to violent resistance, some Indians turned to a spiritual movement to try to preserve their traditional way of life. Around 1890, the ghost dance movement arose in and around South Dakota. Ghost dancers believed that if they gathered together to dance and engage in religious rituals, eventually the white man would disappear and the buffalo would return, and with them the Indians' traditional customs. But even though a combined force of Sioux and Cheyenne warriors completely destroyed George Custer's force of 250 cavalrymen at Little Bighorn in 1876, and Geronimo took years to subdue in the Southwest, Western Native Americans were all defeated by 1890, and the majority were moved to reservations. Thanks, Thought Bubble. Boy, this Wild West episode sure is turning out to be loads of fun. It's just like the Will Smith movie. All right, Stan, this is about to get even more depressing, so let's look at like some pretty mountains and western landscapes and stuff while I deliver this next bit. So in 1871, the U.S. government ended the treaty system that had, since the American Revolution, treated Native Americans as if they were nations. And then, with the Dawes Act of 1887, the land set aside for the Indians were allotted to individual families rather than to tribes. Indians who, quote, adopted the habits of civilized life, which in this case meant becoming small-scale, individualistic Jeffersonian farmers, would be granted citizenship, and there were supposed to be some protections to prevent their land from falling out of Native American possession.
Heavy on
But these
supposed to
protections
be.
were not particularly protective, and much of the Indian land was purchased either by white settlers or by speculators. After the passage of the Dawes Act, Indians lost 86 million of the 138 million acres of land in their possession. Oh boy, it's time for the mystery document. The rules here are simple. I guess the author of the mystery document, and then you get to see me get shocked when I'm wrong. All right. I have seen the great father chief, the next great chief, the commissioner chief, the law chief, and many other law chiefs, and they all say they are my friends and that I shall have justice. But while all their mouths talk right, I do not understand why nothing is done
Justice
for
the
my
band
people.
reference.
I have heard talk and talk, but nothing is done. Words do not pay for my dead people. They do not pay for my country now overrun by white men. They do not protect my father's grave. Good words will not give my people a home where they can live in peace and take care of themselves. I am tired of talk that comes to nothing. It makes my heart sick when I remember all the good words and all the broken promises. I mean, that could be almost any American Indian leader. This is totally unfair, Stan. All I really know about this is that the great father chief is the president. I mean, it could be any of a dozen people. How about if I say the name in 10 seconds, I don't get punished? And start. Sitting Bull, Crazy Horse, Geronimo, Chief Bigfoot, Keokuk, Chief Oshkosh, Chief Joseph, Chief... Oh, yes! Yes! And now let us move from tragedy to
Okay.
tragedy. So if you're thinking
Chief
that it
Joseph.
couldn't get worse for the Native Americans, it did. After killing off the buffalo, taking their land, and forcing
Are they
Indians into
running the
reservations,
buffalo down with a
Bureau of
train in
Indian
that
Affairs
picture?
instituted a policy that amounted to cultural genocide. It set up boarding schools, the most famous of which was in Carlisle, Pennsylvania, where Indian children were forcefully removed from their families to be civilized. This meant teaching them English, taking away their clothes, their names, and their family connections. The idea, put succinctly, was to, quote, kill the Indian, save the man. Now, the U.S. wasn't the only nation busy subjugating its indigenous inhabitants and putting them on reservations in the late 19th century. Like, something similar was happening in South Africa, in Chile, and even to First Peoples in Canada. And you're usually so good, Canada, although the slower pace of Western settlement meant that there was much less bloodshed, so another point to Canada. And as bad as the American boarding school policy was, at least it was short-lived compared with Australia's policy of removing Aboriginal children from families and placing them with white foster families, which lasted until the 1970s. All right,
Oh my
gosh! This episode up. Let's talk about cowboys, the Marlboro man riding the range, herding cows and smoking, solitary in the saddle, alone in his emphysema. Surely that is the actual West.
Then he died of lung
Men
cancer.
and women, but mostly men, who stood apart from the industrializing country as the last of Jefferson's rugged individuals. But no, once again we have the railroad to thank for our image of the cowboy, like those massive cattle drives of millions of cows across open range Texas. Yeah, they ended at towns like Abilene and Wichita and Dodge City because that's where the railheads were. Without railroads, cowboys would have just driven their cattle in endless circles, and without industrial meat processing, there wouldn't have been a market for all that beef. And it was a lot of beef, if you know what I'm talking about. I'm actually talking about beef. By the mid-1880s, the days of open-range ranching were coming to an end as ranchers began to enclose more and more land and set up their businesses closer to, you guessed it, railroad stations. There are also quite a few things about Western farming that just fly in the face of the mythical Jeffersonian yeoman farmer ideal. Firstly, this type of agricultural work was a family affair. Many women bore huge burdens on Western farms, as can be seen in this excerpt from a farm woman in Arizona. Get up, turn out my chickens, draw a pail of water, make a fire, put potatoes to cook, brush and sweep half-inch of dust off floor, feed 3 litters of chickens, then mix biscuits, get breakfast, milk, besides work in the house, and this morning had to go half-mile after calves. These family-run farms are increasingly oriented toward production of wheat and corn for national and even international markets rather than trying to eke out subsistence. Farmers in Kansas found themselves competing with farmers in Australia and Argentina, and this international competition pushed prices lower and lower. Secondly, the Great Plains, while remarkably productive agriculturally, wouldn't be nearly as good for producing crops without massive irrigation projects. Much of the water needed for plains agriculture comes from a massive underground lake, the Oglala Aquifer. Don't worry, by the way, the aquifer is fed by a magic and permanent H2O factory in the core of the earth that you can learn about in Hank's show, Crash Course Chemistry. What's that? It's going dry? My God, this is a depressing episode. Anyway, large-scale irrigation projects necessitate big capital investments and therefore large consolidated agricultural enterprises that start to look more like agribusiness than family farms. I mean, by 1900, California was home to giant commercial farms reliant on irrigation and chemical fertilizers. Some of them were owned not by families, but by big corporations like the Southern Pacific Railroad. And they were worked by migrant farm laborers from China, the Philippines, Japan, Mexico. As Henry George, a critic of late 19th century corporate capitalism, wrote, "California is not a country of farms, but of plantations and estates." When studying American history, it's really easy to get caught up in the excitement of industrial capitalism with its robber barons and new technologies and fancy cities, because that world looks very familiar to us, probably because it's the one in which we live. After all, if I was running a farm like that Arizona woman I talked about earlier, there's no way I could be making these videos because I'd be chasing my calves. I don't even know what a litter of chickens is. Is it 4 chickens? 12? 6? It's probably 12 because eggs do come in dozens. The massive agricultural surplus contemporary farms create and the efficient transportation network that gets that surplus to me quickly makes everything else possible, from YouTube to Chevy Volts. And no matter who you are, you benefit from the products that result from that massive surplus. That's why we're watching YouTube right now. So agriculture and animal husbandry did change a lot in late 19th century America as we came to embrace the market-driven ethos that we either celebrate or decry these days. And in the end, the Wild West ends up looking a lot more like industrial capitalism than like a Larry McMurtry novel. The Wild West, like the rest of the industrialized world, was incentivized to increase productivity and was shaped by an increasingly international economic system. And it's worth remembering that even though we think of the Oregon Trail and the Wild West being part of the same thing, in fact, they were separated by the most important event in American history, the Civil War. I know that ain't the mythologizing you'll find in Tombstone, but it is true. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next week. Crash Course is produced and directed by Stan.
Cool. Okay, we watched Crash Course. Let's move on to the next thing. Discussion template. Fuck, okay. An hour and 26. An hour and 26 minutes. Is it another podcast? Or is there actual images in this one? Is this a movie? Why is there a transcript? Go away. This is a movie. Wait, what does it say? The contents of this video device are protected under copyright and other intellectual property laws. This video device is licensed only for non-commercial private viewing in homes. Any distribution outside of the license. Okay, I cannot show this on stream. I'll get in hella trouble. It's literally telling me right here that if I show this on stream, that the Pinkertons are gonna come for me. Okay. Damn. God, is it like an action film? What? Okay. No, pause that. What? Okay. So I gotta watch a movie in order to run this discussion post. I have read The American Yawp. I've watched that stupid Crash Course video. I will do this discussion post later. I wonder if I can do the quiz. We're gonna try the quiz out. No one tell me the answers. I can do this. When did the Homestead Act... What did the Homestead Act encourage in the West? Plantations? Or was it family farms? I feel like it was plantations. No one look at me right now. I'm totally doing this legitimately. I mean, it accelerated settlement. It definitely wasn't married women to independently file for land. It wasn't the preservation of the land for the bison populations, obviously, because we obliterated the bison populations. Let's see. I don't think it was family farms either, because we got nothing but like big farms out of it, right? I mean, I get, but it was family farm. Yeah, okay, it's family farms. Chapter 17, who were excluded from filing claims under the Homestead Act, select all that apply. Married women. Single women and married men could definitely apply. Said it was in chapter 17. Were married men or unmarried men? Yeah, unmarried men. So it was just married women. Chapter 17, the California Gold Rush of 1848 to 1849 was the only significant precious metal rush during the mid-century in the United States. I was gonna say there was other ones false. What was the purpose of the Western cattle drives? To use railroads to transport cattle to the growing cities in Texas, to avoid the cold winter of the Great Plains and the heat of summer in Texas, to bring the cattle to the railroads so they could be sent to cities. I'd like to make a good grade. I mean, it was so they could just get higher prices on their cattle. That's what it said in the thing, so I'm gonna stick with that one. I think it's either that one or to use the railroads to transport cattle to the growing cities in Texas, but I think it's to so they could be sent to cities such as Chicago and New York because they were doing it for money. So surely, which of the following groups dominated the settlement of the West according to your crash course video, Westward Expansion? Okay, guys, y'all were here for that, watching that. What is the answer to this one? No, I'm joking. Let me. I mean, it was the. It was after the Civil War. Americans from the southern United States? I mean, considering they went over there and immediately started turning people into slaves, I would assume. And I mean, there were a lot of Mexicans there to begin with. I don't think it was the Chinese or the Europeans. Like, I'm iffy. You know what? Yeah. I get 2 tries. We'll give it a shot, you know. What explains the popularity of Wild West shows? Men like Theodore Roosevelt felt the most masculine work existed in the softer world, a factory and felt the most masculine work existed in the softer world of factory and office work. No. The Old West seemed an uncomplicated place where the struggle between right and wrong was clear, unlike modern America, which seemed increasingly morally complicated. Although the shows offered a view of American Indian cultures, most Americans believed that native cultures were disappearing, if not already long gone, and felt no urgency to see their dances and hear their songs. No, it said they felt urgency. I'm gonna say it's this one. Chapter 17. The California Gold Rush of 1848 to 1849 was followed by precious metal strikes in Colorado, Nevada, Idaho, Montana, and the Black Hills. True. Why did most Americans settle the West? I mean, it's got to be the Homestead Act. So yeah, family farms. The influx of over 100,000 migrants to the Rocky Mountains had a more significant impact on the region's development than the gold they sought. True. Working class women in mining towns were often employed in service industries such as shops, saloons, and boarding houses. True. All right, guys, let's see how I did. Failed. Please don't fail me. Hey! Who else was it? Fuck! Okay. I was half right. And man, and I was sitting there tripping on like, oh, I don't know if it was Mexicans or not, but no, it was the Americans I was wrong about. That's alright. Yeah, I did pretty good on that test. I'll call it. I'm happy with that. I'm happy with that. We did alright, fellas. We did alright. We may have learned something. Look at us go. Okay. So I still gotta do discussion, and I still gotta do my short essay, which the discussion is gonna take a while. That's a long freaking. Let's go ahead and check out the short essay. Kellogg? Like the cereal? That doesn't look too bad. This is something I actually like. My professor has me sit down and write it out on a piece of paper and then take a picture and turn it in. Crazy, but whatever. Like, I'll live. Pull up our short essay template here. This is the template for writing the short essays. 1 to 2 complete sentences provide the title of the source and describe what it is. 1 sentence provide the date using the book, and 3 to 4 complete sentences briefly describe the historical context, including the title and the Roman numeral as to where I found the information. And then in only complete sentences, explain one main point the author's making, provide a direct quote, and explain what it means in your own words and how it supports your answer about it being a main point. And then in only 3 to 5 complete sentences, tell me how the author's main point personally relates to your life today. Use your educated opinion. Surely I can go ahead and get this done. And then I'm going to be done with history for today. And then actually, fuck it. I'm going to do this and then I'm going to be done with class for today because judging by my timestamp here on my stream, it's been almost 2 hours, and I think 2 hours of classwork ain't too bad, and I think it's a reasonable amount of time to spend on my classwork in total, so try to keep myself from going crazy and getting burnt out, you know. Got my pen, got my book. Alright, let's start with this first one, and only 1 to 2 complete sentences. Actually, what I'm going to go ahead and do here, let's see, this is the chapter 17. Oh, what's on the tip of my pen? The chapter 17 short, haha, essay. And then I'll write my name over here. And then I'll write the date. Okay. Alright. We got all that set up, ready to go. That way my professor knows it's me. Alright, so in 1 to 2 complete sentences, I have to provide the title of the primary source and describe what it is. So this is, let's see here. Laura C. Kellogg on Indian Education from 1913. The United States used education to culturally assimilate Native Americans. Laura Cornelius Kellogg, an Oneida author, performer, and activist who helped found the Society of American Indians in 1913, criticized the cultural chauvinism of American policy. Speaking to the SAI, she challenged her Indian audience to embrace modern American democracy while maintaining their own identity. So is it a speech, I'm assuming? Speaking to the SAI. Okay. So I would assume that means this is a speech by Laura C. Kellogg. Okay. What were the... Provide the title of the primary source and describe what it is. So we'll just do Laura C. Kellogg on Indian education was a speech given in front of the Society of American Indians. That sounds good. 1 to 2 sentences, it said? Yeah, so this one sentence describes everything I needed it to describe. In 1 complete sentence, provide the date of the source. So the speech was given in 1913. Okay, cool. First 2 points down, written, good to go. So now I gotta pull the textbook back up and briefly describe the historical context. Let's go ahead and read this first. That way when we go to find the context in the textbook, we're not like fiending for it. Alrighty. The word education has several meanings to our race, and at the start I wish to clear up in our minds a common misunderstanding of the term. To some of our Indians at home, going away to a government school means an education from which we may expect anything and everything. To some others, anything the Caucasian does is educated, and anything Indian is not. To those who have gone the whole way of enlightenment, education has another meaning. With them, there is proper appreciation of the real values of truth, whether they may be found, whether in an Indian or paleface. There are old Indians who have never seen the inside of a classroom who I consider far more educated than the young Indian with his knowledge of Latin and algebra. There is something behind the superb dignity and composure of the old bringing up. There is something in the discipline of the red man which has given him a place in the literature and art of this country, there to remain separate and distinct in his proud active bearing against all time, all change. We want education, yes, we want to know all the educated Caucasian knows, but we want our self-respect while we are getting his knowledge. In short, let us discriminate between the goods and bads of civilization and the goods and bads of his own heritage. Weed out as many of the bads as we can and send him along the way a finer type of citizen than if we turned him into a very average white man just to have him white in culture. This is what I mean by recognizing the real values of truth, whether they are to be found in paleface or the Indian. There are altogether 357 government schools, 70 of these reservation boarding schools, 35 non-reservation boarding schools, and 223 day schools. The enrollment in these schools totals 24,500 children. Besides these are 4,300 children in the mission schools and 11,000 in the public. Of the 11,000, the 5 civilized tribes of Oklahoma have 6,900. The number of children of the race in school in the country then is 39,800. The last report shows an increase of nearly 2,000 in attendance over the year before. Yet there are still 9,000 children without school facilities. Another objectionable feature of the boarding school is this matter of health. We are the several hundred together, and a large percentage of them are afflicted with trachoma and tuberculosis. The means for their segregation is not sufficient. The well children are opposed to these dangers. The well children are open to these dangers. Think of the danger of trachoma. No immigrant can land in New York who has trachoma, but here we are exposing the youth of the race to an incurable disease. If this were done by one individual to another, it would be a penitentiary offense. I hear someone defending the Bureau. Go to the Indian schools and say to the nurses and the doctors that they shall not lose their positions if they will tell you the truth about the condition of the schools, and we would soon enough find that the hospital equipment in the Indian service is nowhere near adequate to the demand. The white child comes from a well-established economic environment. That is, he has a home where the one idea in the community is to overcome deficits of material well-being. This child is continually asking of his parents to find a better means of support and accumulation. It calls for a continual effort toward improvement. The community life is organized. It produces and has markets, and money is in circulation in it as a natural result. The Indian child's environment is the reservation, a world of deficits. The group has really custodian care. There is no real personal liberty in wardship. There is no incentive in the community for any special effort. There is no reward for doing the right thing. The social life is not organized. There are no markets of their own making and their own responsibility. There is no money continually in circulation. As Marvin Jack in his paper last year said, when money enters the reservation, it loses its elasticity. When rations and annuities come, they come like spasms. There is nothing being learned by the adult population from necessity. What they do through their own sense of natural acumen or decency. The great wonder is not that they accomplish so little, but that they are not all outlaws. Our future is in the lands of the educational system of today. Those of us who have come thus far know how our youth have longed to reach the summit of the mountain. Let us not forget our own yearnings and the prayers of our ambitious young for opportunity. Let us climb the highest mountain without looking back till we have reached the top. Interesting. Okay? Okay. So, we got a textbook, 3 to 4 sentences, describe the historical context, what was going on at the time the source was written, include the title. So let's go pull the American Yacht back up. Westward migration. Oh, this is here. So it'll be in the federal peace policies and in the Indian Wars. Let's see here. Probably in this paragraph. Okay. So this is what we got. So describe the historical context of what was going on at the time of this specific essay. Well, whatever. Writing, speech. I'm considering it's probably a speech, I would assume. So I need to give 3 to 4 sentences of context on what it was like at this time, the historical context. It was written in, what was this, 1913? Yes. So why don't we make our lives a little easier here? Okay, cool. Where was the ow. Okay, so that's not gonna help either. I'm trying to control F and search and see if I can't find something that's gonna help provide me with a better. Oh, I wonder if. Okay, not the Latter-day Saints. Said. Okay, but okay, this isn't helping me. See, and this just isn't deep enough into the time of when this was given. 1877, 1880. The displacement of Native Americans, allotment era and resistance. Honestly, I might have a better time here because this is talking about where they believed that most of the Native Americans were gone already. Yeah, this is it. So it starts here at 1889, so that's about 24 years prior to the current era we're in. And then there was the romanticization of the West that we see here. So the West is history. 1893, 1890. Hmm. So suppose I should use this specific chapter because it's the closest we have to the date of this speech, and it's talking about how um, the Turner thesis and was creating the West to be like more of a history. Um, and they presented the frontier thesis and the significance of the frontier in American history. And he saw it as, instead of war and plunder and industry, it was waves of civilization. Hmm. We'll use this one, and we'll say that they were creating the frontier thesis and romanticizing the West for its advancements in the creation of what they considered civilization. Um, so yeah, we'll start with that in chapter 8, which they want us to use the Roman numerals, so I'll do that. In chapter 8, the West as history. The Turner thesis. They describe the I almost want to say like the invasion of the West because it definitely felt like an invasion. Mm, well, let's just stay neutral because I don't know this professor and I'm not trying to piss him off. Um, the historical changes of the West in a romanticized fashion. Um, they saw it as waves of civilization instead of war and plunder. Do I need to add like a fucking quote for this? Okay. Waves of civilization instead of war, plunder, and industry. Okay, we gotta get one more sentence in there. Um, so far I've got in chapter 4, the West is history, the Turner thesis. They describe, comma, actually, proper English. They describe the historical changes of the West in a romanticized fashion. They saw it as waves of civilization instead of war, plunder, and industry. I just say, during this time, um, many people felt nostalgia for the great frontier. Okay. I mean, I think that's pretty good, right? During this time, many felt nostalgia for the great frontier. And we should say something about the natives. And assumed many native civilizations were already gone. We'll say to no longer exist. Saying they're gone wouldn't be necessarily correct, because they assumed that natives are still around. It's just that they assumed that the civilizations of the natives no longer existed at all. Okay. Alright, what's our next thing? In only complete sentences, explain one main point the author is making. Provide a direct quote and explain what it means in your own words and how it supports your answer about it being a main point. If the source is visual, okay, whatever. It's not visual. In only complete sentences, explain one main point the author is making. Okay, so now we have to find something in this essay that would be considered a main point. Uh, hmm. I don't know, this one's kind of difficult to find something I would consider being a main point. We could focus on the health aspect. I feel like that would probably be the easiest to conquer. Um, let's see. Does it want me to like also give? No, it just wants me to provide a direct quote. So in this speech, Kellogg mentions, and then no migrant can land in New York who has trachoma. But here we are exposing the youth. So in the speech, if I could spell, Kellogg says, where was it? We'll highlight it. So, no immigrant can land in New York who has trachoma. In New York who has trachoma. But here we are exposing the youth. That's where I'll end it off at. Here we are exposing the youth. Actually, we'll just of the race to an incurable disease. Of the race to an incurable disease. Okay. So, and how is this a main point? So it's a main point because it's showcasing like just how little Native people were receiving and how these schools were insufficient. So what we'll say, I believe this to be a main point to emphasize the poor conditions and it's like the general lack of care for the education. Okay. Anything else I think I should mention there? Look again. See here, I believe this is to be a main point to emphasize the poor conditions and general lack of care for proper education in native schools. This is backed by the earlier paragraph in which they state there are 9,000 children total without school facilities, maybe? Actually, what we can say, it's like, this also exacerbated the lack of incentive in these communities. How do I spell that? Yeah, there's no, okay, we're just gonna mark that out. Exasperated. Exasperated. Cool, thanks, that's all I needed. Appreciate it, Google. Where was it? The lack of incentive in these communities. Cool, okay, on to the next point. We're moving on. So in 3 to 5 complete sentences, tell how the author's main point personally relates to your life today, and use your educated opinion. Alright. So, I mean, I guess I can just move into how, like, a lot of schools, especially in rural areas like the area I live in, lack necessary facilities in order for children to properly learn and thrive in the environment they are in. Okay, honestly, that sounds beautiful. That sounds really good. This speech relates to my modern life in reference to the schools I have oh my god, I can't spell today. Attended. Cool. In rural America. We'll just talk about my elementary school. My elementary school consisted of 250 total students at its height, and many facilities within the building were lacking. For example, our gym had uneven flooring. Our gym did have uneven flooring. had uneven flooring, and improper locker rooms. Start a new sentence, and regarding that, half of the school was so old that it still had remnants of the chimneys from pot belly stoves and poor insulation. Okay, check that out, guys. Oh, my name's on that. Check that out, guys. We did it. That looks pretty good. That looks pretty good. I feel comfortable turning this in. Hopefully he appreciates it. Yeah, and I will do that shit for fucking... We'll work on English class some tomorrow. And I'll go ahead and complete the... Like, I'll watch the movie and then do the discussion and get that out of my way. Because that shouldn't be too difficult. And then on the next day, I can sit down and do the discussion post for my history class here that we're all doing together. I'm gonna clear out my phone here. I've got a bunch of shit. We'll go ahead and get a good picture of my short essay here. Make sure I don't have my bear dogs out in the photo. Okay, good. I don't. And I will go ahead and turn that shit in and pack up my backpack. Let's go to our Motlo Hub here. That's right, I changed my password, so I've gotta sign in. What? Oh, I see why. Sign in, receive a code via SMS, use that code, verify, take me to D2L. Hurry up! I'm an impatient woman. Hurry up. And then we'll go to the content. Chapter 17. Scroll down to our short essay. Upload a file from photos and videos. Gallery. That one. Done. Uploaded. Very good, very good. And submit. Cool. Alright. Got that shit is done. Wonder if I refresh it, it'll show up that I uploaded a file here. Well done. Yeah, there's my file. Cool. Alright, put my book up here. Alrighty. So, I'm going to, what we'll do over here, run my intermission screen so I can take all this shit down and y'all ain't gotta look at like, no fuck shit, empty space. Except for the other empty space you're staring at right now. Congratulations! Yeah, just close that shit out. That's crazy. What's that look like? Okay. Okay. Pull that back up. Actually, why don't I just do it like that and then pull this up? Ow! I think something just bit me. Okay. Hello, Death Shadow. Welcome in. I literally just got done doing my classwork. That's what I've been doing for the last 2.5 hours. Should really clean up in here a little bit. It's kind of messy. Um, but yeah, that's what I've been doing for 2.5 hours was just this classwork. So, but I finally just finished it, finished my history stuff, so that's pretty cool. I'm gonna go take my backpack here back into the living room. Check out my backpack. It might as well be an Ita bag at this point. So much shit. But yeah. Um, I wonder if the Steam servers are still down. Because that might be what we do next. I might go take another quick break. And then we can, like, play some games or something. Wow, the Steam servers are taking a really long time to boot up. Okay, there they go. Let's see what I got here. I mean, we could play Phasmo. I've got this game that's like a kind of like a D&D style game called Road Warden that I've been playing that we could play. That one's pretty cool looking. It's been fun so far. Yeah, actually, I think I'll probably play Road Warden. I want to try to at least complete the story on it at least once. What's with the purple filter? I like it and it matches my stream colors, so I thought it was fun. So I put the purple filter on. I can take it off. Settings. Well, maybe I can. Maybe I don't know how. Yeah, yeah. Um, not surely. Custom. Guys, maybe I don't know what I'm doing. Oh, that's what it is. That's where I'm messing up. Webcam. And then it's under... Wait. Perhaps... No, disable that. What was that? Ah, found it. Filters. Edit my filters. And then I can just add a filter. Just add that. And then click on it. And... Oh yeah, I can change the colors too. Hell yeah. I don't know. I just thought it was fun. Yeah, see? I just take it off. I just don't like that my room looks so orange. And I also hate having to light it up because I just don't like using... You can see how shiny my fucking face is, and you can see all my forehead wrinkles. Am I being talked to? Sorta. I love watching people hop into the chat room and start, or the Discord, and start losing their mind about snot-nosed children. Okay. Phew, it's hot in here. Man, is Queso supposed to be streaming tonight? I kind of want to watch him stream. I love watching him while I try to go to sleep. Okay, I'm gonna take a quick break because I've been in front of this computer for a while and I just can't keep doing it. And I need to get up and stretch my legs. Actually, no, dog. Never mind. It's almost 9 o'clock and I gotta work at like 8 in the morning. I'm just gonna hop off. I'm gonna go lay down and sleep, probably. But okay. But yeah. Goodbye, fellas. I will see y'all later.